Charles Kuralt was really good at showing America its softer side. The CBS News reporter died on Friday in New York, but his road trip stories will always be remembered. But America's most trusted storyteller had a secret that could have ruined him. Charles Kuralt spent 29 years sending a woman $600,000 while his wife stayed home. He bought property in Montana, paid for kids to go to college, and signed letters calling himself Pop to children who weren't even his. CBS viewers saw a nice guy traveling quiet roads, but in real life, he was living two totally different lives. The truth stayed hidden until the day he died. Then a letter showed up that changed everything. Charles Kuralt wasn't really raised in Wilmington, even though he was born there. His mom, Ina, only went there to have her baby because it had a hospital. On September 10, 1934, she had him at James Walker Memorial Hospital. Then she and her husband Wallace took their baby back to her parents' tobacco farm in Onslow County. The farm was 100 acres big. That's where little Charles spent his early years. There was no electricity, no indoor bathroom, and no sink. They drank water from a pump on the porch using a hollowed-out gourd that hung on a nail. Heat came from wood stoves, but Charles didn't complain. He made newspaper kites with flour paste. He tied them with tobacco string and flew them so high above the barn that he joked God could read the headlines. He also carved slingshots from tree branches and poked Venus flytraps with pieces of straw. His family kept moving around. First they lived in Washington, North Carolina, then Stedman, then Atlanta. Finally, they settled down in Charlotte in the mid-1940s when Wallace Kuralt became head of the Social Services Department for Mecklenburg County. Every new town brought something different, and young Charles became obsessed with radio. At just 14, he started announcing minor league baseball games and hosting a music show on Waze Radio in Charlotte. That same year, he won a local writing contest for a sports story about a dog that ran onto a baseball field. He was going to Alexander Graham Junior High from 1945 to 1948, and his teacher Ann Batten taught him journalism. He wrote a column called The Kaleidoscope for the school newspaper. Then something amazing happened. In 1948, when he was still only 14, Charles won the National Voice of Democracy contest. Only 4 people won it that year. He got a $500 scholarship and was flown to Washington, D.C., where he met President Harry S. Truman at the White House. He also gave his winning speech at Colonial Williamsburg, standing on the same spot where Patrick Henry once shouted, "If this be treason, make the most of it." Charles later said his speech was trying to capture that same kind of bold American spirit. The contest had only been around since 1946, so he was one of the first winners in the whole country. This moment showed everyone how talented he already was, even before high school was over. His summers were spent working in tobacco fields with his grandparents in Onslow County. He'd collect leaves during harvest time, hand them to someone called a stringer, and those would be tied onto wooden sticks for drying. They'd hang them in log barns. But what he really loved were the 50-mile trips to the tobacco market in Kinston. His grandmother, Rena, would load up their wagon with dried tobacco, hook up the mule, and they'd go. During those rides, she'd tell him stories about bandits who used to rob farmers coming back from market. She said that's why wagons used to travel with armed guards at the front. Charles would pretend he was protecting them, always watching for pretend outlaws. These memories became the foundation for how he told stories later on TV. He also saw things most white kids didn't see. Growing up in the segregated South, Charles went to all-white schools, but he could see what was happening to black people. Police in Charlotte were often violent. The local black newspaper, the Charlotte Messenger, wrote about officers beating people in the streets. His father's job as a social worker showed him even more inequality. This all stuck with Charles. Later in life, he never pushed politics on TV, but he always made sure to tell stories that gave a voice to people who were often ignored. That was his way of taking a stand at Central High School between 1948 and 1951. He wasn't just another student. He was known as the best writer in the school. His classmates voted him most likely to succeed in 1951, but he was already succeeding. At 14, he was a radio announcer. That year, he won the Voice of Democracy contest, shook hands with the U.S. president, and earned $500. That would be worth over $5,000 today. He edited the school paper so well that actual reporters started noticing him. He started at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1951, and his work there was incredible. He majored in history, but also worked for several radio stations, including WUNC and WCHL. He covered football and basketball games, made radio documentaries, and kept up his grades. He joined the St. Anthony Hall literary fraternity, showing he wasn't just smart with news, he was a deep thinker too. His classmates couldn't believe how he managed to do so many things at once. He could write a full script, record it, and then go take a history exam without missing anything. In 1953, when he was only 19, he worked part-time at Ways Radio in Charlotte. This wasn't just a college job. He was doing professional broadcasts, calling baseball games with the same smooth style that later made him famous. He spoke like he was sitting next to you in your living room, while others just yelled out statistics. Charles told stories, and people loved it. The station got phone calls praising him. Managers couldn't believe he was still just a teenager. But he had something different, a calm voice that made people feel like they were being seen and heard. By 1954, he became editor of the Daily Tar Heel, the student newspaper, and he wasn't scared of anything. He wrote angry editorials against racial segregation, even though he knew it would upset a lot of people. Some called him a communist. State politicians insulted him in public. When the university banned alcohol in fraternities, Charles wrote an editorial that simply said, "Pierre, meet Fred," making fun of the school's policy by comparing it to a French campaign against wine. He didn't just report the news, he challenged people in power, and he used humor to do it. In 1955, he graduated from UNC with a degree in history. His family wanted him to go to law school. That would have been the safer choice. But Charles had just won a national award for a radio documentary on North Carolina's history. It was so good that even professionals across the country noticed. His professors were shocked when he turned down law school to chase journalism full-time. It was a big risk. His family wasn't rich, but 2 years later, in 1957, CBS News hired him. He was just 23, and he became the youngest reporter in the network's history. In 1959, Charles Kuralt moved to CBS headquarters in New York. For him, it was like a dream come true. His childhood hero, Edward R. Murrow, worked in the same building. After only a week filling in for a writer on Murrow's nightly show, Kuralt was suddenly moved to the television news team. CBS desperately needed fresh on-air talent. Years later, Kuralt admitted it himself. He said they needed on-air people badly. At that time, television news was still new and risky. He worked on programs like Dimensions on Health and created short stories about American life. His job required him to write fast, clear radio pieces in the middle of the night. That pressure taught him how to tell strong stories, quickly, something that would shape his entire future. By 1960, something unexpected happened. Kuralt, barely 25 years old, became the first host of a primetime series called Eyewitness to History. The show had a new style, and he quickly became the face of it. He helped cover the historic debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. That moment changed television forever. A shocking 77 million people watched those debates. That was more than 60% of American adults at the time. A major magazine called Variety praised him, saying he was young, good-looking, full of confidence and control. He didn't seem dramatic or fake. He made people feel they could trust him. What made it even more amazing was that he was still learning how to do television while covering one of the most important political events in U.S. history. In 1961, CBS gave him a much bigger challenge. They sent him to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, as their chief Latin American reporter. He was still in his 20s. His job was to cover 23 countries. The dangers were real. There were street riots, revolutions, and constant fear. One wrong move could mean getting hurt, or worse. He had to report from places where governments were falling apart and violence was in the news every day. He stayed in that role until October 1962, right when the Cuban Missile Crisis made the whole region even more dangerous. Every report he sent back proved he could handle chaos while staying calm. He was becoming more than just a reporter. He was becoming someone people depended on. When he came back to the United States in 1964, the country was changing fast. There were protests, war, and civil rights struggles. Kuralt was right in the middle of it all. His coverage of Vietnam was terrifying. He remembered one assignment where he and his crew followed a group of Vietnamese Rangers. They were ambushed. He said, "Half the company we were with got killed. We were lucky as hell not to get killed." In 1965, he made a Christmas special from Vietnam. In one heartbreaking scene, a soldier was shot right in front of the camera. He also went to Selma, Alabama during the civil rights marches. His quiet way of